afternoon to all. I, Rupali Gupta, Assistant Professor, Department of Information Technology, IIMT College of Engineering, Greater Noida. I take this opportunity to welcome you all in today's webinar series on the project delivery methodologies in IT ecosystem. A very warm welcome of today's speaker, Mr. Purvendu Pandey, sir, Director of Engineering, Dr. S.S. Tyagi, sir, IIMT President Dr. Sanjay Pachori sir, HOD IT Dr. Mahin Sharma sir, and all spectators. It is indeed my great pleasure to welcome the speaker, Mr. Purvendu Pandey sir. He is working as global technology leader and mentor in UK. He has 15 years of consulting, solution design, delivery, and project management experience in multiple domains across UK, USA, APAC, India, Middle East, and South Africa. He has extensive experience in delivering transformation of cloud solutions, ERP and CRM applications across public sector, finance, banking, engineering, and education domains. He completed his BTech from MIT Moradabad in electronics and communication. Purvendu is also a robotics wizard, having won 13 international medals at International Robotics Olympiad. He holds multiple international recognitions for his achievements in field of prototyping working models. To connect you with all, Purvendu sir designed a PCB drilling robot modeled on CNC machine and was awarded as innovative project in a national event at IIT Kanpur. Now I would like to invite and welcome our eminent speaker, Mr. Purvendu sir, to address students as well as faculty members. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So I hope this is good afternoon. For me, it is good morning over here in UK. Thank you for the introductions, Rupali, and thank you all for coming to the session and inviting me to actually share my experience. So this is not a session or one-way monologue, but it's going to be more like experience sharing what I have learned through in all my life. So I have prepared a small presentation for you all. And what I'll do is I'll put it onto the screen. So just Sanjay, if you can double confirm you all able to see my screen.
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, so I chose this topic, project delivery methodology in IT ecosystems, and that is the reason why I chose this topic for you all. So I've been through the journey, what you all right now in. We have been doing engineering. So I did my engineering somewhere 15 years back. One of the biggest problem I found was how do we connect to day-to-day life in executions, and that's what you're going to do in rest of your life. When you go in your careers, you will be given different actions to be implemented. So I picked up this topic. And primary purpose of this would be, by end of this session, I would like you all to connect with your day-to-day activities. How do you do it, and how do you plan for it? How do you use any methodologies in your project work? And that's what would be the aim for me during this session. So I'll go through a small agenda. So I'll go through first what is project delivery. Now, there are a lot of IT jargons which are being used over here. So I would definitely like you all to understand what these small topics mean. I would like you all to understand how do you actually choose a methodology? How do you understand, whether you have to go for a waterfall, do you have to go for an agile, and all these different methods what we have for implementing a project. Some fit well in one, some doesn't fit, and some fit into the other scenarios. We'll go through few of the common known methods, and I'll try to give you an overview and an idea about what these means, how they get implemented in practical scenarios, and how actually you can use them in your projects and in your work style. Okay. So anytime, if any one of you have a question, so I think that you can type in your questions, or you can reach out to Sanjay, and probably we'll deal with the questions. So don't get afraid. And if you are doubtful about anything, don't go on assumptions, write it down, and we'll clarify all those points later once we are at the back end of this section. So let's begin first. What is actually a project delivery methodology? I mean, what I have used in this slide. But before we answer this question, or we attempt to find an answer for this question, I think we should try to understand two key points here. What is project and what is delivery? So because if you don't understand what is project, and you don't understand what it results into, what is the delivery, and then there's no point for you to start understanding what is methodology to make it work. So for that, identifying that method, how do we implement this? It is important for us to understand what is project and what is delivery. So I thought about it when I was preparing this PPT for this session. So I had a thought, what is the best way for me to approach this? And I would like you all to just get connected with a very live example, what you face in day to day. And almost each one of you would have gone through this phase, and if not yet, you will go through this phase. So let's take a very simple example in our family life, where we take a project, we take an assignment and say, let's make our house now. So that basically means you want to get a house. So your dad, your father, your family, everybody gets together and they go through a process. Everybody goes through a process of making a house. So you would go and you will try to find out piece of land, or you will try to find out a flat. Then if you want to make it from beginning, then basically you'll try to find out who are the people required for it. Do I have an architect, or do I need people who will come there, labor, carpenter, and a lot of things. So what's going to happen is you will follow a path. You'll follow a path to make your house. Now, this house is actually your product. That is what you want to achieve in end of the day. And the whole process of making it happen is actually a project. So project is a container. It's a confined space in which you have a clear objective, what you want to achieve. So in this case, your objective is you want to get a house. And then you have a timeline in which you want to achieve this. And then you have a method. How do you go for it? So this process is called as delivery. So basically what you are actually doing is you are taking up a project with an objective in mind, and then you decide a path to go there, right? So you can have multiple approaches. So you can take an approach one in which you decide, okay, maybe each one of us are going to contribute, and let me make my own room, let you make your own room, and other people make their own room, and we all will get together later. That's one of the approach. And that approach could be very systematic and methodological, in which you will go to an architect, you will get your land finalized, you'll get your maps defined, then you will hire a contractor, and then basically a contractor will make it for you. You will have your inspections, and then you get your house, right? So these are multiple approaches which you can have, and each one of us actually go through this process, whether it is house, whether it is something else. So what happens is, based on your approach, you can actually have an output like this. So one of the approaches where it is not well defined, you will have an output where you might still have a house, but that house is of no use for you. It's not up to what you actually wanted. And similarly, that could be a well-defined approach in which a house is what you actually wanted, if it is not exactly the same, but it is quite similar. And this is exactly what happens in a software or IT industry. So in IT, whatever you see around you as a product, as a service, so say you use a lot of IT products, and WhatsApp, Facebook, and these are pretty big ones. But if you take a very small things which are coming in, everything has got a delivery method in which we plan for a delivery, and that's how we approach, and that's where the output comes to you all. Okay. Now, we use this quite evidently in our day-to-day life. Only difference is we don't realize that this is actually a proven process. And what naturally we are doing is a methodological process what we follow in our process. Okay. So now I will come back to our first slide where we want to target what is project delivery methodology. So I hope now we're clear with what is a project. So project is a contained environment in which you have got an objective to be achieved. And then what is delivery? Delivery is a process through which you go in order to achieve your objective, what you have set. Okay. And then methodology is actually, it's nothing, but it's a tool. It's a method for us to achieve that. So there are a lot of people in this world who have achieved delivery of the projects by following certain paths, and they have found that it has worked well. Something has not worked well, something has worked well. So that's where these methodologies come into play. They are called as frameworks. Okay. So these are scientifically proven. So I'm not talking anything which is based on just the experience, but it is actually a proven fact. It is a systematic and disciplined approach. So everything goes through a process. It's a systematic approach in which every step is well defined and you go through that step one by one. It's a disciplined approach. So it's once you define a system, you have to follow it. And that's how we achieve our goal. It's a model to design, plan, implement, and achieve project objectives. I'll go through each one of them in a little bit. So design is the phase where you will do an objective setting and you will try to identify what are the bits you are required to do in order to make sure it happens. So say, for example, the previous example, which we took, your house building. So design is when you go to an architect, on a piece of paper, he will show you, we can build this much of basement, we can build this much of room, we need to have a garden, we need to have a parking and all those bits. So that comes into design. So looking at that, you are able to identify what is going to be your end product, right? Similarly, then you make a plan for it. So when you make a plan for it, in that you take out different factors, how much time do I have to implement it? What people are required to make sure that this project gets delivered? What are resources I have at my hand? Do I require physical machines, or do I require any other bits which are required for us to actually do the implementation? And then we come back with a plan. So, okay, first month we're going to do this, second month we're going to do this, third month we're going to do this. He is the person who's going to do this. So these are the factors which will get implemented. Then once we have design ready, once we have a plan ready and everybody has agreed to it, the next step is implement. Okay. And then once we implement it, that's the place where we achieve our project objectives. Now, what it does help. So why do I need a framework? Okay, it's very simple. I can just do a design, I can do a plan, I can actually go ahead and do an implementation. But why do we need a methodology for it? Why do I require for somebody to tell me that you should take a path A rather than path B, or take path C? The reason is that it helps you to define a scope. Now, scope, in a very layman terms, is actually, what do you really want? Do you need a 2-bedroom house? Do you need a 3-bedroom house? Do you need a software with video feature? Do you need a software with just audio feature? Do you need a product with a specific set of requirements? That is called a scope. So it helps us to identify a scope. It helps us to understand time constraints, which basically means in what time do I have to deliver it? Do I have enough time to deliver it? Okay. Then it helps us to understand resources which are required. And these are things which we have just discussed on the point above, where you get, design, plan, and implement phase. Now, how do you make a design? How do you make a plan? You make a plan because you will understand what resources are required. And the last and foremost is quality of delivery. Now, initially, in old days, and next slides will actually define it a little bit better, quality was not considered as a core pillar for a project management, for a delivery. But in nowadays scenario, we have got quality as one of the pillars for the delivery. Okay. And then once you define all these bits, the last step where the methodology actually helps us a lot is to identify the task. Now, what is time, what are constraints, what resources do you have, and when it is supposed to be delivered and what is supposed to be delivered. But how do you do it? So the way you do it is you identify tasks, you identify what actions needed to be done. and you identify when they are needed to be done. So say, for example, you just can't make a room without putting a foundation. If you do it, then you've got a house which is just the other way around, right? So you will have a house which is not stable. You'll have a house which can break anytime. Similarly, if you have a product to be built in, you need to define an infrastructure first before you start writing software to make it work. Okay. So these are different tasks, and order. Order is very important in any project methodology. And these factors will determine your next step is how do you actually choose, right? And what do you choose? So what by end of the session, you will come to know about few methodologies like Waterfall, Agile, right? But the biggest question is, how do you choose them? I mean, what makes you define whether you're using Waterfall or whether you're using an Agile, whether you're using for a lean process, whether you're using it for a Scrum process, and then what exactly will you choose? So the four factors, which are primary factors, and keep it in mind. So basically, what you should try to do is visualize this with each of your projects, your own. So you are in BTech second year, I understand now. So probably next year onwards, you'll start having your own projects, right? And this is what I wanted to talk at the end of this session. How do you apply all these things in your life projects? Okay. So when you are defining a project, you will have these four factors always as a question for you. So what is scope? What do you actually want to achieve out of this project? What is your budget? Do you require to spend some money out of for achieving this project? You know, what is the quality of the product which is going to come out? So if you want to, so I'll give you a practical example of what I did when I was in BTech. And in my final year project, I was an electronics student, quite interested in robotics and physical modeling and software. So what I did was I saw a CNC machine in our mechanical department, and that machine used to actually drill down and based on the softwares, it will actually make the mechanical models out of it, and nut bolts and all those bits. So I had a look at that one day, and I'm just sharing a real story with you all. I'm not saying anything for the sake of saying. And since I had that robotics background in and I was an electronics student, so I started thinking, mixing all of these things together. And one of the things which I used to do when we used to make models and make robots is, if any one of you know, there's something called a printed circuit board. It's like a green color board where you have got circuit designed done, and all you do is you bring on your components and put it over there. Now, it was very costly because if you take a designed board, it was costly to come. So what we used to do was we used to take a general circuit board. It was called GCB, and then you used to put all your components there and put wires and solder them. So what I thought was, can I use this CNC machine type of prototype for me, where I can feed in and I can say, this is my circuit design. I need 2 registers here, 1 capacitor here, 1 IC here. Can this machine help me to make that whole? Okay, and then I will just put it. So that will reduce my time to go and dependency to go to the shops to do it. And actually, that was the idea. So I came up with that idea, and we started working on it. So I had a scope in my head, what I really wanted. I had a budget in my head because I wanted to have some cost savings on it, and I had some budget in my head that what I need to spend to make sure it is gonna be worked out. And then I knew what was the quality which I wanted to get out of it. It was a designed whole general circuit board where I would put my components in. Okay, and then I knew the time because there was always a time bound what we have to achieve by end of next semester. So these are the factors which will determine what methodology do you really want to apply, and we'll go in details in next slides for it. Plus, there are some more factors which come into play. Now, these factors, not very critical ones. They will not change the turn of it, but they're equally important. And that's why you see a little smaller size, because their importance might be a little bit less than what we just discussed, the scope, budget, time, and quality. So flexibility. Do you have flexibility? Are you working in an environment which is very strict, or are you working in an environment which is flexible? Are you happy to make shift some changes and deal with it later? So that decides what type of methodology you use. Complexity. how complex is the project which you're going to implement, right? So if it is really complex, then you might need a very matured model. If it is a small project, then you might need a model which is good enough but not very matured. Similarly, what stakeholders are involved? You know, do you have people who are always with you, or do you have people who are readily available with you? So if you have, depending on what is the availability of the resources to you. And then industry plays a very important role in defining what type of project methodology you're going to use. So software industry has got a specific set of methods and methodologies to be followed. Similarly, they may or may not fit well if in automobile industry, because that's a very different way of designing products and delivering it. So all these factors, and then there are a lot of other factors which will come into play, because it's a project is a live constrained environment. So there will be a lot of other things which come into play. So we've got two ways of project management. So one is traditional. Traditional method is it's like consecutive steps. You go from one step to another step. You make it milestone based. You decide that, okay, after first month I will be able to achieve this piece of work. I'll be able to achieve the second piece of work after second month. So that is basically a traditional method. If you have read through it, Waterfall methodology is actually quite traditional method of implementing projects. While modern methods are the new era of the methods, and they are, they don't focus on linear processes. They focus on broken processes, and they divide things into phases, take an objective, deliver it within that phase, and then move on to the next phase. So they are a bit different than traditional ones. Now, some of them fits good. Some of them are quite tailored to product industry. So let's say if you have to design a product, you might want to take one path. While if you want to do a big implementation of already for a packaged product, you might take another path of how delivering it, right? So examples are like Agile, Scrum, Lean. I mean, all these are new methodologies. So the next slides, we will go through and we'll get into some of these methodologies. I'll skim through them. I'm aware that we just have half an hour left. So I'll try to leave last 10 minutes to have a mutual discussion in case if there are questions. So I'll try to cover it into next 15, 20 minutes about few of these processes. So let's get into this first process, which is Waterfall methodology. Now, Waterfall is it's basically a project methodology which was used traditionally, and what it does, it identifies different phases, and there are phased approach in using Waterfall methodology. So you go through a specific set of phases, you finish that phase, and then you move on to the next. So example would be just like in front of your screen. So you go through a requirement phase where you will sit with all your stakeholders, understand what is requirement, what do you really want, how do you want to come, and a very good example would be the house example, which we have discussed. And similarly in IT industry, so let's say if you have to make a product, okay, or you have to make a software. Now what we literally do is we actually sit with clients. We go to the client places, we have meeting with them, and we note down their requirements. We understand what do they really want. In this process, you have multiple steps. You will have user requirement sessions, you will have playback sessions, and all these bits come into play. Then you go on to the next phase, and that's where you freeze your requirement. And we assume that requirements are done, and now let's go ahead and start doing some design. In the design, you will go through sessions where you will identify their processes. You will try to come up with a possible solutions, and you tell them, this is what the design I feel is going to be fit for you. And then you go into the next stage, next milestone, and that is implementation. So that most of the time, that's the longest phase of a project where you will actually do the implementation. And then comes to the next phase where you do the testing. So basically what you do is you have a set of team who are responsible for testing the software or the solution which you have designed, so which you have implemented. So at this point in time, they make a match with what was required, what was designed, and what is implemented. Is all matching now. So if all matches, it's fine. If not, they will go back to your development team, they will give their feedback, and then basically you go and fix that again deploy it, and they will again test it. And that's when, this whole testing thing happens. So you go to multiple phases. You go to something called a system testing, in which what they do is they test it into a system environment. And then they go on to the next phase, which is user testing, where they invite users and the users will test before that particular product or feature or functionality is live into the system. Once users are happy, then you do the final deadline. Now it sounds very simple, you've got your different phases, different steps, but most of the project face complexity in the phase when of the testing, when you try to match your requirement against what is already implemented. Now that's the place where you find most of the problems, because understanding and communication of all these things in between different teams most likely are the chances that you misunderstand few of the bits, or there is the way information is communicated is not done in the right way, and that's where you have problems. And so in order to cater that comes to the next methodology. Now this is called as Agile, okay? And I think in all likelihood, most of you would have heard about this particular buzzword. So this is actually a buzzword right now in the project management space, which is Agile methodology. Now, what does it mean? So Agile, as the word means in English, is making yourself flexible. So what you really do is, you don't want to get into that long cycle, right? You don't want to get into a stage where your testing happens 8 months later, and then you realize, oh no, what we understood and what we developed is not right. So if you see our previous place, so this is the place where you identify that there is a problem, right? It is already too long. You have already invested 7-8 months. So either customer will have a choice, depending on how big a change is, they might be forced to scrap the project, or they might be forced to redo the project, but that doesn't happen in Agile. So what happens in Agile? Consider Agile as mini waterfalls. So what we do is we divide the whole thing into multiple sprints. They're called as sprints, okay? Now sprint means there is a specific set of timeline in which we will try to achieve one particular feature. Then we have another sprint in which we'll try to achieve another feature. But for each of these features, we'll go through the same cycle as a waterfall will go. So basically, we'll take the requirements, we'll design it, we'll code it, we'll test it, and we accept it, and then only we move on to the next sprint. Now, the question is, why is it useful? It is useful because what you're doing is you're not waiting for 9 months to do this job. You're doing every sprint. So sprint is normally, it is 2 to 4 weeks at max. So you will do the sprints not more than 4 weeks. So within 4 weeks, you'll try to achieve something. And that's where the quality thing comes in. So waterfall is focused on three factors: time, budget, and scope. Okay, any of these three things will define a waterfall approach. But the fourth thing, the quality, is a core pillar for an agile implementation. Okay, now you can see there is an advantage. There is a lot of advantage. And what you see on the screen, user stories, are basically the requirements. So what we do over here is, rather than writing down a monolithic type of requirements, what we do over here is we write it into form of a story, because story is something people relate to themselves. Okay, and when a user tells you a requirement, you note it down and you write it into your technical terms, and that's where the misunderstanding happens. But if it is a story format, okay, I want to do this because I would like to have a system which will allow me to have a session with students so that I can present my presentation. Now that's a story, right? I have told what I really need. So in this, I understand who are the stakeholders, then what is their need, why they need it, okay, and what they need it. So you get a story format, you do a quick development, you test it, and if you find some issues, it's fine. You go into the next sprint and you fix them up. But ultimately, you have achieved something out of this sprint, rather than waiting for 1 year when you will finally see your product. And by that time, you might realize your requirements have changed, things have evolved, right? So I think I've talked about this basically in middle of it. But if you see this slide, so waterfall actually you get to see the product only at the end of the cycle. And let's say in the simplest word, if it is a 12-month project, user will only have a good idea about their product. What they are going to get is somewhere in 8 to 9 months when you actually hit the testing phase, right? By that time, it might be too late. By that time, the requirements might have changed, and it is very, very common phenomena. And I'll tell you a practical reasoning for it. If you keep a watch on your last 5-10 years, you would have seen the technology has changed. Things change very quickly, right? This is the quickest way of change in technology. When 15 years back, when I was in your stage, the change was still there, but it was not that fast. And probably even my seniors, 15 years back to my time, the change was pretty slow, but there was always a change. I'm not denying that fact, but the rate at which the change has happened is pretty fast. So there all likelihood in a waterfall project within an IT, things might change. You're using a cloud methodology to implement a specific functionality, but by the time in next 3 months, there is another feature which has come in which can actually reduce your complexity. So there is all likelihood people would like to use those functionalities, and that is a very practical scenario I'm talking about. It's not something which is on theory. It happens practically, where features which you are going to use changes very frequently. So that's where Agile has an edge. Agile actually allows you to make that change quickly, right? And helps you to develop that particular path. Okay. Now, the bit is, how do we actually do an Agile? I mean, how does it even fit in? And I'll be very candid and honest about it. When we started our project, so we used to be very, very close to Waterfall. That was the method which I used to use almost for the first 10 years of my career. When I first got introduced to Agile, I felt like, no, this is not going to work, because how can I develop something which constantly changing? How do I keep a track of it? How do we understand? And that's where this methodology frameworks come into play. So say, for example, you've got something in front of your screen now, which is Scrum. Now, Scrum is one of the methodologies to implement Agile method of working, right? So what we do is, every sprint is divided into 2 to 3 weeks. Very simple. You have a project vision. So you come up with a vision. That's, I want to come up with this particular product, which can change life of everybody, which can change life of my residents within my society, which can change life of anything. So that is something called as vision. Then you come with epics. Now, epics is, what do you really want to do to achieve this vision? So say, for example, if I want to change the way citizens live in a city, okay, I would need to have some epics which will define. I would need to have an infrastructure. I need to have a cloud solution for it. I need to make sure people are having capabilities enabled within organization. So these are epics. Then each of the epic is broken down into user stories. Now these are called as product backlogs. So what we really do is we take up one of it. So let's say I want to develop an infrastructure. So that's an epic. What I will do next is break it down. What infrastructure do I need? Do I want to take a cloud solution? Do I want to buy servers? Okay. What technologies are we going to involve? What technologies are we going to implement? So they become user stories. Okay. So we break this user story. So I will say, okay, as an administrator, I would like to have an environment which I don't have to maintain every day, so that I can save my time to do something else. Now that's the story. You hear me now, right? So what are the bits in this? As an administrator, so we know what administrators will need. They need an infrastructure. What do they really want to do? They don't want to spend too much of time in managing it. Okay. And why they need it? So that they can save some time and they can have some value and do something else, right? So you have broken it down. So I broke this user story and I say, okay, fine. So I will define a group of people in my infrastructure team called as administrators. I will define a solution which will have least maintenance. Now, how do we know that? We don't want to do a server. We don't want to buy a server, because you buy a server, then you have to maintain it. Okay, so why not rent it? So that's where the cloud solutions come in. Okay, I'll go to Microsoft, I'll go to Amazon, and I'll get AWS. Okay, and then will that result into a time saving? Now that becomes our KPI. That's what we will measure once we implement it. We will talk to administrators later and say, are you really saving your time? And once all of these are achieved, then we say, yes, user story is done. Okay. So once you have user stories defined, then you do for a plan. You understand, and I just talked through that process. You make a plan. How we're going to buy a software? Are you going to write a software? Are you going to buy an infrastructure? And then you go for that implementation phase. So taking the same example, then you go for a cloud solution. Okay, fine. We have decided we'll take a Microsoft solution. Okay, so we will go and buy a subscription on Azure. We'll put some virtual machines. We'll put some computers over there, and then we go into the review phase. In review phase, we all sit together again and see whether what we have implemented is what they wanted. So we go back to our user story and say, last all these broken bits, right? And then we do a retrospective. Now, retrospective is a session in which we all sit together and we go through what we did, what went well, what went not, what was wrong, what was good, and we take that as a learning. So if you find something which didn't work well, so say for example, when you define the user story and you identified that we need to have some cloud solution to be implemented. Now you went ahead and did just one cloud evaluation and say, okay, I just went to Microsoft and I found it. When I implemented it, what I realized, the cost is too high. By the way, I don't mean that Microsoft cost is too high. So I'm just putting this as an example in a context. So you might say, oh, in my retrospective session, I might say, oh, we should have actually evaluated 3 more vendors to find it out. Okay, that was one way. Second way is I design a solution, I implement it, but we did not give enough time to test it because our implementation time was too much. We did not factor in the people who are on leave, right? So that becomes our retrospective. So retrospective helps us to understand what was wrong. Did we take too much of work to do? Because it is only 4 weeks for us to implement. And we took a work to be done, which took 3 weeks to implement. And we never had enough time to test it. So next time, in next sprint, what we would do is we will break our user stories even smaller. And we'll say, oh, we can't implement all. We have to just pick up the ones which I can do it in 2 weeks so that my testing team has got 1 week and my deployment team has got 1 week. And we have enough time to fix the code and make it release, right? So this is what comes in retrospective. There are a lot of people who are involved. And if you remember, when we were talking about what makes you decide what methodology are you going to take in, and that's where one of the features I told was stakeholders. Who are the people involved and what type of roles or what type of profiles do they hold, which will actually make me to decide whether I'm going to do it through Scrum method or whether I'm going to do it through Waterfall method. So these are the stakeholders. Okay. So say, for example, if you're doing a product development, you want to create a software like Facebook. Okay. So you have a specific set of product in your mind, and that means you will have somebody who knows about the product. Okay. And then once you understand those bits, who are your people, what are your end customers, the stakeholders, the people who are responsible for deliveries, the team members, do you need a full-time project manager or do you just need a Scrum Master? Scrum Master is a kind of project manager. He's actually not a project manager. And his responsibility is to make sure everything fits in together, everything works well. And that's where you see one piece of work over here, which is daily Scrum. So daily Scrum is nothing, but it's a casual chat. Meet at one place and say 3 things. What went well? What did you do yesterday? What am I going to do tomorrow? And what I'm doing today? And are there any roadblockers for me? So 3 major things get discussed. So it's just like tea, coffee chat, right? But it's with an objective. It's with an objective of what we are trying to achieve as part of this sprint. Okay. So that's what and Scrum framework is. This is how you do it. So similarly, just like this is Scrum, there are multiple other methods, and time is short, so we just can't go each one of them in detail. And there are too many, and they are too complex. Some of them are really complex. Some of them are, you can use it. So I think it is a journey. It is an evolution process through which you will go through. Okay. So one bit which I wanted to touch and give you an idea about, and that's basically a little bit of advanced concept, but this is the next step of project methodologies, a delivery methodology which we have in IT system, and that is called as DevOps. Now, so if you think about all the methods which we just discussed before, so they were with a very specific project scope in mind, and we will take a project with an objective and we will deliver it in a period of time, right? So what happens once you go live with a product? You can't stop working on it. You have to come up with new features. You have to come up with new plans, right? But can you stop your softwares for that time? You really can't. So say example, you've got Amazon, right? Amazon has got a website where you all can, place your orders, get your things. And I'm sure, if not all of you, but at least 90% of you are quite used to it. You do online shopping, okay? And as technology changes, as requirement changes, as competition changes in this world, what happens is they're forced to make changes to their software. They have to make it more efficient. They have to ensure that it is compliant to laws. They have to make sure it is safe. It doesn't have vulnerability, So in order to make that happen, what happens is there is a big set of work going in the background. And as you all know, and when you go in next 2 to 3 years, when you have your own software created and you try to deploy it, you'll face this bigger challenge. And that challenge is you have to make system down for some time to make sure a new feature is added, right? And that's the biggest problem. For smaller softwares, it's okay. But for giants like Amazon, for the big features like, Facebook, and actually I'm taking these very big names, even medium level of medium scale of businesses, they just can't afford to go down. You just can't afford website to be down because that's a commercial loss, that's a reputational loss. You as a customer, when you go on their website, and if you don't find that website good, you will never go back again. So it's like a chain effect. So in order to tackle that, we come with a new concept, and that is called as DevOps. Now, DevOps is development and operation. So what it essentially means is you have an operational team who is responsible for managing the work, managing the product, making sure that the business runs, making sure that the product runs. And then you have a development team who is responsible for building up new code, new features, and put it in. So what we have done is we have mixed them together, okay? And that is called as DevOps. I'm not going too much into it, but I'm sure if you all are interested, we all can get in touch, and you all, I'm more than happy to do another session on this DevOps itself, because this in itself is a big thing. But what we essentially do is we build this, we do a planning, okay? We make the code changes, we build the solution, and then it goes through a release process. It gets deployed, and then it gets operated. And this whole cycle keeps on running. You will not even know that something has happened in the background. And that's how these big businesses or these big software companies are actually managing their work. So they keep doing things in the background, but as a customer, you will never know. And that's called as DevOps. Okay. So Sanjay, is there any question yet on these ones? I just have last couple of minutes to talk through and to go through what I really wanted them to learn practically. But if there are questions beforehand, we can go through it.
Sir, I think you explained very well, and there is no more question arises from any students. And प्रेंद्र सर बहुत अच्छा लगा आपका सेशन पूरा फैंटास्टिक रहा
थैंक यू
सभी लोग यहाँ एंजॉय कर रहे हैं
ओके सो last thing which I wanted from this session and is basically I wanted to talk through a little bit about roadmap, so सारा सेशन हमने कर लिया, सारी चीजें हमने समझ ली, बट जैसे शुरू में मैंने कहा था सेशन के पहले, so all I wanted was to make sure how do you use it, right? I have been through your journey, all the students, right? And we have been through a lot of seminars, we have been through a lot of topics and all. The biggest problem, and which actually did not generate interest in me, is if I can't apply a learning in my day-to-day life, then it will not help me, right? And it will just become another session. Aaj session kiya, gaye, tata, bye bye, that's it, done. So it's a tick box on your semester. So what I really want, and that is a reason why I picked up this topic, because मुझे ऐसा लगा कि this topic can be used really well, and this is not only for the students, but equally applicable for each one of you who is working as in capacity of a faculty and staff. Okay, and I'm just sharing it. I'm not teaching it. I'm just sharing what I feel is the right thing. And because I used to make a lot of robotics model, and I shared my story of that CNC machine, and actually I applied it, and that's where I felt if you apply it, then it is good. So what I really want is for all the students, because you're in second year, you're just reaching to second year, if I'm not wrong, and probably next year onwards you will have your small projects. Think about using all these slides which we just discussed, and try to think, can you use a project methodology to actually implement your project which you'll be doing next year? So basically means you go through that process, you define what you really want to do as part of the project. So let's say you want to create a parking system, okay? Just as an example, parking system for your institution, and that becomes your BTech project. So what you do is you first go through that first phase and you identify, what type of methodology do you really want? And for me, if I was in your place, I would say, because I don't have much time, I might have just 3 months, 4 months time. So perhaps Agile or Scrum method would be the best one to implement. So what we basically will do is we understand what do we really want. We break it down into smaller pieces. So parking chahiye, to parking ke liye हमें एक सेंसर चाहिए होगा, सेंसर के लिए you have something called as APNR, तो उसका एक सॉफ्टवेयर बनेगा. You might need an MCR type of coding, right? So you identify those bits. You identify who's going to be part of your project team. Whether I'm having friend 1, friend 2, friend 3, do I need a mentor? Okay, because I'll tell you what happens is you start working, and then later on you realize, oh no, perhaps I need a mentor. I need somebody who can help me. I need somebody who can tell me how do this MCR thing works. Now you can always do it, but by the time you realize, and by the time you reach to that faculty or teacher or whoever it is, okay, he might be occupied. He might be occupied with somebody else reaching out to him. So if you plan it well at the start, you secure his time, and you go to your professor and say, sir, I might need your time in 2 weeks time, 2-hour session, at least I need this help. Okay, so that's where you identify. Then do you need to plan for some budget? Of course, everything will need a little bit of cost, and I'm being very frank. Okay, people might say, no, everything is, you don't need to put money and all, but you definitely would need. You need paper printing and all those bits. And अभी तो बीटेक में आप लोग करने जाओगे, बट इवन 12th क्लास तक आपने देखा होगा एग्जाम्स के पहले नोट्स कराने के लिए जा रहे हैं, एंड सडनली यू हैव गॉट दैट शॉप, फोटोकॉपी शॉप है, उस फोटोकॉपी शॉप में यू हैव गॉट all you have got a big queue. So instead of you focusing on study, you have waste your time 2 hours for making that particular photocopy, right? And this is exactly what's going to happen in your BTech. This is going to be even more complicated in your BTech, because you're going to get your folder files and all these things done. And just this is a simple example. So you plan for all those things. You plan for that budget. When do you really want to do it? And then you define your objectives which you want to achieve. I can bet it, if you present this way of information back to your examiner who is going to assess your project, and you go through and you tell them, this is the process which we went through, we identified people, we went through this process, we met quite regularly, we understood our dating, I think you will realize things have changed. And the long-term benefit of this would be, once you go in a real world, when you join a company, when you try to, when you are going to work out, you will realize that you already know these jargons, which we never knew. So we had to go through our training cycle, and it took almost like 4-5 years before you understand this whole thing. So why do you want to start anything after your BTech starts? So you would like to complete it, right? So that was the roadmap I wanted you all to go through. Think about it, and if you need any assistance, if you need any help from me, I'm more than happy. I'm available for you all. I will drop my contact details, but if you want to actually take down this barcode, this barcode. You can connect me on LinkedIn, and you can connect me on LinkedIn, and whenever you want to reach me, I would definitely be available, if not immediately, but I'll get back in touch with you. So you can always reach me by this barcode, and you'll find me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, each one of you. Thank you for being patient, and again, thank you for inviting me to share my experience over here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Your session was really wonderful. I mean, the way you explained all the things is actually a project and how to deliver it. And you have taken a wonderful example to explain by taking an example of house and what are the different project delivery methodologies and how to choose it and what to choose it. And you have tell the different technologies and what are all things required nowadays, waterfall model, agile model, everything. You explained everything so beautifully, sir. The session was so interesting, so innovative. And sir, in future, we will definitely going to ask you for some more sessions, as your session was so informative. Now, I'm sure the student will love to hear you again and again.
My pleasure, anytime.
And sir, in next time we are going to hear from you something on robotics.
Okay.
Because sir, that will be more informative now. So we will love to hear something about robotics, because you know, sir, students are always tempted about when they hear the word robotics now. So it always tempts them. So in near future, we are definitely going to have a session from you on robotics.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Yes, sir. So now I request Sanjay Gupta sir to formally end the session. Sanjay sir.
प्रेंदु सर, बहुत फैंटास्टिक सेशन रहा। तो इसमें कोई नो डाउट कि रूपाली मैम ने कहा कि अगली बार रोबोटिक्स पे आपको कॉल किया जाएगा। सर ये श्योर है कि आपको अगली बार रोबोटिक्स के लिए बुलाया जाएगा।
ठीक है। Okay, thank you.
On behalf of IIMT College of Engineering, Greater Noida, I take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks to those who directly and indirectly contributed to this workshop on project delivery methodology in IT ecosystem, organized by the IT department. At this outset, I thank our director, Dr. Sanjay Pachauri, HOD IT department, Dr. Mahendra Sharma, and resource person, Mr. Purnendu Pandey sir. We are enlightened with your acknowledgeable workshop, which tells us about the latest trend and technology and helps us continue learning and gaining knowledge during the pandemic time. A special thanks to all faculty members for their unflinching support and coordination. Our heartfelt thanks to our students for active participation. With these warm words and a kind message, we move to end of today's workshop. Thank you. थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू प्रेंदु सर। फिर हम लोग मिलते हैं एक नए टॉपिक